I think that, yeah, the bad news yesterday to me was Philadelphia beating the Rams, especially in a couple of ways, because not only keeps Philadelphia in the race, but it also keeps the Bears alive for that one of the top 2 seeds for a first-round bye. And it would be nice if the Bears had nothing to play for in Week 17, because the Vikings may well need that game. And so all of a sudden, if the Bears have a shot at a first-round bye, are they going to come with all their horses and
right.
not sit out Khalil Mack or Trubisky or any of those guys, or pull them after the first quarter? And so that was kind of a double whammy that Philadelphia was able to win that game yesterday, and gives them confidence, gives them life. But there's still the scenario out there the Vikings can clinch this weekend, that if Washington loses on Saturday to Tennessee, very probable. The Titans playing pretty well now, and it's in Nashville. And if the Eagles lose to Houston, and Houston's got a lot to play for, but that's in Philadelphia, but the Texans are sitting there right now in the number 2 slot in the AFC, and they'd like to hold on to that spot over New England for sure, because everybody knows how tough it is to win in Foxborough in January. And I think the Texans, if they can be a home team, would have a really good shot at advancing to the AFC title game. And so it's a possibility that the Eagles could lose to Houston, Washington could lose to Tennessee, and if Carolina is knocked out by the Saints and the Vikings beat Detroit, then they're in, which I think is obviously what they would love to see, and not have that final game against the Bears really be depending on their fate. But they still may have a lot to play for, even if that scenario unfolds. If Seattle loses to Kansas City, then all of a sudden you have a shot at that 5th seed, and you really want to get that spot. So it's always interesting this time of year when you get all these playoff scenarios and try to figure it all out and put it all together, and that's always one of the fun things about late in the season in the NFL, when you know that you at least control your own fate. But ultimately, it's still going to come down to got to beat Detroit and find a way to win this game, and which you think on paper you should do, but they've had some trouble with the Lions historically. Now, handled them in Game 1 this year, beat them in Detroit last year on Thanksgiving, and so we'll see how it shakes out. I think the really interesting part of this game to me is, how does Matthew Stafford react after the last game when he got sacked 10 times by the Vikings? Is he going to be a little jittery and skittish? and looking at that pass rush, he knows they had 9 sacks on Tannehill yesterday, and so that is definitely going to be a key, what kind of pressure they can put on him, and if they can shut down the Detroit running game as they did last time in the November 4th game.
I think this is a game they should win handily. Really, Kenny Galladay is the only receiver they have left who scares you at all, and he's a big guy, so I think he's a natural matchup for Xavier Rhodes. They haven't been running the ball that well. I'm not sure they love Matt Patricia. Now that none of their games mean anything, it's probably not going to be much of a crowd. I just think this is really set up for another. And just like we said going into the Miami game, we thought that was set up for a big Viking game. When we both picked them to win by 13, 14 points, and we were actually underestimated how much they're going to win by. I think they win this one. There's really, especially if Chicago doesn't need that Week 17 game, there's really a path here to, as you pointed out over the last few weeks, there's a path here to being 9-6-1 and having this ended up being a pretty good season despite all the difficulties.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And as we said, when you looked at their schedule before the season, there were a lot of tough tests that they had, and a lot of those games they lost were on the road to tough teams, and losing at home to New Orleans. Obviously, the game that has haunted them all season was the Buffalo game, and they'd sure love to have that cushion. If they were sitting at 8-5-1 instead of 7-6-1, then all they need is one win and they're in. But that's not the case right now, so they have to do what you got to do, and that's where they're going to have to go. And the Detroit team they beat in November had Marvin Jones. He's on injury reserve now. They had Kerryon Johnson. He has missed the last 4 games. We'll see if he's back this week. Their leading rusher, and they shut down LeGarrette Blount in that game. And so, as you say, Galladay is the guy that they got to watch. He had a 146-yard game yesterday against Buffalo. So he is a explosive kind of receiver that Xavier Rhodes, you think, can hopefully handle him. And then see what shakes out elsewhere. But again, the pass rush I think is going to be a key factor this week.
Let's get to some league perspective here. A couple people who I respect wrote that, man, the Patriots just didn't look like themselves in that game at Pittsburgh on Sunday. And, Brady's he's getting somewhere near the end. We don't know the exact end, but he's getting somewhere near the end. And we know he's had, he's butted heads with Belichick in recent years over his trainer. He is way up there in age. Gronkowski looks like he's just barely hanging together at this point. I mean, he still makes plays, but you can tell he's dealing with a lot of injuries. They tried to trade Gronk, last offseason, and he basically said, nope, I'm finishing my career here. Their running backs haven't been as dynamic in the last month as they were earlier in the season. They just, other than the fact they handle the Vikings very well, they have not looked like a great team lately. Do you think at some point saying the Patriots are near the end is actually going to be accurate? It's been inaccurate to date. Is now the right time to say that?
I don't think yet. It's a little premature, and I think that they're going to be in the playoffs. They're going to win the East. They're going to have at a minimum a third seed, and then you get into the playoffs, and Brady, we know what kind of big game player he is. I think yesterday was really kind of an interesting game certainly for Pittsburgh. It was a huge game for them. Maybe I think at this time of year, oftentimes it's the desperation factor that determines games, and I think we saw that last night for the Rams against the Eagles. Obviously, the Eagles were the more desperate team. I think for the Vikings, the Dolphins yesterday, both teams were desperate, theoretically, but perhaps more so for the Vikings, and as opposed to the Dolphins were tied for that last wild card spot in the AFC, but there were a ton of teams around them, and they didn't have tiebreakers over anybody, and so it would have been tough. But yeah, I thought Brady's interception late in the first half, where he just threw it up down the sideline, that was a really uncharacteristic play for him to make, and Gronk had no targets in the first half, which is really ridiculous for Josh McDaniels, a supposed offensive genius, and so. But meanwhile, they give up only 17 points in the game. You'd think that'd be enough to win, but their run defense was a little shaky. Samuels had 142 yards rushing for Pittsburgh, and Connor was out. So obviously, part of that is that they were playing the pass, that they were worried about Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown and the Pittsburgh passing game, and rightfully so. And but I don't think the Patriots are exactly what they were. I think they're still pretty good when they get everything going, and they showed the Vikings a couple of weeks ago how tough they are in Foxborough for sure. But perhaps on the road not quite as formidable, and that's why I think for Houston it shakes out as really important for them to try to hang on to that number 2 seed and a potential matchup with the Patriots in Houston as opposed to in Foxborough, and that could be something that could really help the Vikings this week because Houston plays Philadelphia.
Absolutely. Hey, get back to the Vikings for a moment. How do you feel Everson Griffin has played since he came back?
I think okay. I think he has moments where it seems like he gets caught inside a little bit on some outside runs and things like that, and he had a sack yesterday and I think has had a decent game, and I think it's been good for the Vikings to have the rotation that they have, and Stephen Weatherly's had a nice season.
He has.
And is a good player, a very good player, and I think he's potentially for the future a guy they can count on. I think Everson has been okay. Now, I don't think he's been the Pro Bowl Everson Griffin this season. Obviously, Danielle Hunter is.
Yes.
And so if you're picking a defensive end that's going to the Pro Bowl, it's Danielle Hunter, not Everson Griffin this year. And meanwhile, inside, Sheldon Richardson had made an impact to it second half yesterday, and just the whole defensive line stepped up, I think, in the second half. I thought early on Linval Joseph was so-so in the game, and the Vikings defense, but as we said, they really came on in the second half and made plays. And I think when you get a game when Harrison Smith only has 2 tackles, or one tackle. That's very unusual.
Yes.
That means the people in front of him are doing their job. And got to point out Anthony Barr, who had maybe one of his best games of his career, had his first multi-sack game yesterday, and really making an impact and forcing things. And I kind of feel like he's on a little bit of a salary drive, don't you?
Yes, I do. And it's funny how that happens, isn't it? A guy
Yes.
whose effort and consistency has been questioned suddenly as he's nearing an offseason where he is going to be dealing with salary negotiations. Suddenly he is surging.
Yes.
I'm sure it's all a coincidence, Jeff.
Yeah, of course. So I think they're going to have some interesting decisions to make with him, particularly. Trey Waynes is another guy, and I think, honestly, that Trey Waynes is a guy that they could let go rather than pay him a bunch of money. I'd rather see them put money towards a free agent offensive lineman and then go in the draft in the first couple rounds, pick a maybe one or two offensive linemen to beef up that group and let Waynes go and figure you got Mike Hughes coming back. You got
Mackenzie Alexander has come on strong.
Mackenzie Alexander has come on strong. You got Holton Hill, who has showed up and made some plays. And so really, Waynes right now may be a luxury going forward. Let's
wrap up the show with some Twitter questions. We always appreciate listener input on TalkNorth.com. Once again, thanks to WhiteBearLakeSuperstore.com. And also, if you'd like to advertise with the program, you can reach me at talknorthpodcast@gmail.com. Jason Ludwig basically sent a couple tweets saying, hey, isn't it obvious that Cousins is better under center? Isn't this better for play action? Isn't this the way they should be going?
Yeah, it seems like it. I think he was 6 for 6 under center in play action yesterday, and helped the running game, helps Dalvin Cook get a big running start. And I think that quarterbacks generally kind of like being in shotgun oftentimes because they can see the field a little bit better. But it was a nice change of pace. I thought the other really good change of pace that I've been hooting and hollering for all year was more up-tempo, which Kevin Stefanski implemented earlier in the game this time against Miami. I'd like to see more of that in the future. I think they do a really good job in up-tempo. I think Cousins does a good job in that hurry-up offense. And so I'd like to see more of that down the stretch, especially when you think about playing a team such as the Bears with their pass rushers, and if you can kind of wear them down as you go forward or head into the playoffs. Both the Bears and Dallas, potential first-round opponents, have pretty good pass rushes, and that up-tempo, I think, could really help the cause. It also limits substitutions on the defense. But yeah, under center, he definitely had some good effect yesterday and in the hurry-up. So I liked both of those things that happened.
From Dave Cook on Twitter, does Zimmer let his defensive coordinator go to promote Andre Patterson, thus keeping him on staff with the Vikings? I already answered this on Twitter, but I want to get your viewpoint. My answer was, I think Andre is very happy being a defensive line coach. I think he's very happy living in Minnesota. And the reality is that George Edwards doesn't do a lot. Mike Zimmer runs the defense. So I'm not sure Andre Patterson vying for the defensive coordinator position would really be good for either the franchise or him.
No, I think that Andre is a terrific defensive line coach, and he was part of our group back in 1998 on that 15-1 season, so I've known him a long time. He's very dedicated to his craft, loves his guys, and really works with them. And you look at the improvement of players such as Danielle Hunter, came in as a third-round pick. And
he was very raw when he got in.
And Everson Griffin was, a fourth, I think? And so that tells me that a coach is doing a really good job in development. Stephen Weatherly, a seventh-round pick.
Yeah.
And so I don't think Andre is looking to be a coordinator at this stage of his career. I think he's very happy coaching the defensive line, does a great job, and he doesn't get criticized by the head coach, so that's a good thing.
Absolutely. From Will Peterson on Twitter, obviously it's only one game, but if Stefanski continues this success, can we see him as the offensive coordinator next year, or is there a fear he could take a different job next year?
Well, I think his contract is up, as I understand it.
It is.
And so he could be in play, potentially, but I think that he's been here now, 10 years or so, and so I think if he was offered the coordinator position and the salary was competitive with what he could get elsewhere, I think that he would be happy to stay here as the coordinator and work with the guys he's been working with and in an offense, and hopefully with a playoff team. And however, you never know who's going to make a run at you, and maybe he could be the next Sean McVay, who all of a sudden someone goes after him as a head coach. at 36 years old.